Good evening, and thank you for joining us for Red Clay Rundown. I'm Russ Spencer. Brian Robinson and Tharon Johnson are here tonight to talk politics, but we begin with the top stories on Fox 5 at this hour. A sheriff's deputy shot and killed a man during a traffic stop on I-85 in Coweta County today. It all started when deputies tried to make a traffic stop on I-85 in Grantville. Deputies say the driver would not cooperate, and when he shot at them, they fired back. Deputies tased him. That had no effect, they say. Deputies say that's when the suspect pulled a gun. When he shot at the officers, they fired back. The GBI is investigating. Henry County police arrested a man after a 5-hour SWAT situation ended peacefully. Police closed East Atlanta Road for hours and asked residents to avoid the area. The suspect's father told us the 23-year-old was suffering a mental health crisis, and he says he's simply grateful that his son wasn't hurt. In Gwinnett County, detectives need help finding a man who police say threatened a taxi driver with a knife. It happened on May 10th. The taxi driver drove the man to the 1500 block of Shenta Oak Drive in Norcross, and when they arrived, the man only paid part of the fare and told the driver he had to go inside to get the rest. Police say he returned with a knife in one hand and a pole in the other. If you recognize him, call Crime Stoppers. All right, we start our political coverage now with immigration enforcement. Georgia is a top state for immigration arrests since President Trump returned to the White House because of some close partnerships between Georgia law enforcement and ICE. A report released by the AJC today reviewed body camera footage from a number of traffic stops that led to immigration arrests and even deportation. The footage showed conversations and text messages that detail how local law enforcement put an emphasis on immigration enforcement. One officer with the Jefferson Police Department in particular was recorded asking a colleague if he wanted to, quote, snatch up some folks. He then said, quote, work vans or trucks with multiple occupants are the general target. The response messages read, yeah, white work van and a ladder rack is like a 90% chance, LOL. The Jefferson City Attorney said the police department's work with ICE began in an informal way, and individual officers chose to notify ICE rather than it being department policy. So let's bring in Tharon and Brian. Brian, good to have you back from Israel. We'll talk about that later in the program, but let's begin with what's going on with this immigration enforcement business. Tharon, it certainly sounds like, at least in the case of some of these Jefferson officers, in one case a former officer, that they were specifically targeting work vans with the hope of finding illegal immigrants.
And that goes to my point that I've been making on this show now since our inception, and that is that we're spending millions of dollars on ICE agents who clearly don't have the proper training, nor do they have the proper sort of conduct and approach that is going to be effective. When I hear those reports from those Jefferson County officers, Russ, it just makes me sick to my stomach that we literally have people in this country who are being targeted because they're in a work van, because there are multiple people that are actually out here trying to be productive citizens. But what I'm very most concerned about is that if there are people who are documented, or folks who are here on a work permit, or people who actually maybe came to this country illegally and then they went back to their country and they came back temporarily or long term, and they're trying to actually make a living for themselves to be productive participants in our economy, those folks are being targeted. Now, I want to be very clear, again, as a Democrat, and B. Rob has heard me say this, and I said this most recently on a national platform, is that I don't want people coming to this country illegally who have criminal history, a rap sheet that's longer than the ones that we see here in the country, that's coming over here to murder, harm, and to rape people. I do not want those folks in the United States of America. But the unfortunate thing, Russ, is that we have folks that are already here, immigrants who are here, that came over here legally or illegally, and they're trying their best to try to contribute to society. Now, the other thing I'll say lastly is this whole ICE raid, we kind of took our eyes off it a little bit because we know that there's been a series of events of corruption. The former Homeland Security Secretary was removed from office. We've seen reports where there's been an abuse of power and there's been a colossal amount of spending that is not showing the direct results. And so while we are in high numbers when it comes to detaining people here through the ICE efforts, what I've heard from a lot of people in law enforcement, and women and men, is that what we don't hear about, Russ, is that once these people are detained and how they're being counted with recent bills that we have on the books, is that we've seen that the numbers are driving up. But what's not reported is that the colossal damage that this actually has to the detainee's life. Now, some of them are detained and some of them are sent back and they're here legally and they are, got a choice to make. But the people who are either documented or actually have the proper permits to be in this country and work, with them being targeted the way we're hearing. And just those comments by those officers, that's just not what any Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, or Independent should be reporting right now. We need to be supporting civility. Brian, I just heard this whole message today about hope and civility, but we do have people in this country who are out here just targeting folks because they're riding around in a crowded truck or van. It's just not right.
Brian, it doesn't sound like they're going after the worst of the worst in this particular case.
Well, let's look at the context here. The stories that we were reading about in the news reports that we're talking about now were from the summer of 2025. So this is about 5-6 months into the Trump administration. The nation is dealing with a surge of illegal immigration during the Biden years. And there is an attempt to begin to roll some of that back. And yes, when Trump campaigned, he talked about deporting dangerous, criminal, illegal aliens, people who have committed additional crimes since entering the country illegally. And of course, there's huge support across the American population for deporting, detaining, getting rid of people who are criminals who either been, committed burglaries or acts of violence or et cetera. Americans want them gone. Now, the political support, when it gets beyond that, for people who come here and they get up and go to work every day and they're in work vans going to paint a house or mow a yard, the political support for that is much different. And by the summer of 2025, you still had a very zealous effort to try to roll back some of the damage that was done during the Biden administration. And, Democrats can say they're against illegal immigration, but at the end of the day, many of them are against any sort of real enforcement mechanism with teeth. And as I heard Vice President J.D. Vance say over the weekend, anytime you try to take on a issue that involves millions and millions of people to enforce the law, to even go by the rule of law, you're going to have some bad video clips. You're going to have some bad exchanges between officers that don't look good in the light of day, don't look good when put into the news media. That's certainly going to be a part of this. I think what we've seen since the summer of 2025 is a recalibration by the Trump administration. I think getting rid of Kristi Noem at the Department of Homeland Security was a step in this direction. It was the president acknowledging that the enforcement mechanisms had really gone beyond the support, the political support of the American people. Now, there's still a lot of folks in this country, and I'm probably very conservative on these issues myself, who are fine with these tactics because they are so appalled at how illegal immigration has overtaken the nation in such huge numbers. We've had porous borders. It's created huge problems. And it's not just people coming across the border from Central and South America and coming in to do jobs. It's way more than that. These are drug dealers. These are terrorists. It's not just Latinos who come here and take, honest jobs. And which there's a lot of sympathy for those folks in the American population. But we have Iranians and Russians and Chinese coming over that border too. So dealing with this issue is a national security issue, and we need to do something about it. I do think there's been a recalibration, and we're taking a more sensible, more moderate approach to illegal immigration today. But even some of these examples, I agree with Tharon. We shouldn't be pulling over work vans that, because they're white work vans with a ladder. That's not a good reason to come up with some reason to pull a van over. I'm against that. That will create societal problems because you're eventually going to go after people, or you are always going to go after people who are here legally or perhaps are citizens. So I'm for doing away with that, any kind of policy that allows that. I do think that was probably a rogue officer who was doing that to begin with. I don't know of any police department that allows that kind of policy to be in place. So I think we're in the right direction, trying to find a happy medium. But yes, we still need to enforce the law and get rid of illegal immigration.
Well, it's interesting because pretextual stops like that, even though they may be against the spirit of the law, apparently are not illegal. But I do want you, Tharon, to address what Brian said, which is that Democrats, many of them, are against any immigration enforcement with teeth. Do you agree with that? What's your response?
That's not true. One of the things that the Republicans use as their talking points when it's convenient is that they call my former boss, Barack Obama, the deporter in chief. I mean, this is a Democrat who right now I would say is actually probably the most popular Democrat within our party, who actually deported people more than Donald Trump. And so clearly, through his 8 years, you didn't see Democrats, sort of just running against him. Now, some question the validity and the quantity of it, but we understand that. And then listen, Russ, I don't hear any pushback from my Democrat friends when I say, hey, I'm against people coming over here illegally who have a criminal record with the intent to kill, harm, and rape American citizens. That is widely known within our party. But on Red Clay Rundown, Russ, we got to be honest with the people. Is there a small fraction of my party that thinks that we need to figure out a way to have a bipartisan approach to securing the borders and actually coming up with true immigration reform? Absolutely. And a part of that, you do hear some that say, look, we need to figure out a way to actually be more welcoming. But what I hear more than ever now, Russ, is that people, and as B-Rob pointed out, it's not just all folks from people from Mexico and Venezuela. There are folks from the continent of Asia, Africa, Indian people coming over here, German folks that are coming here as well, illegally. And some of these people are being sent back. But what's happening is that they are trying their best to re-enter the country legally. And that is something that I think Democrats and Republicans can agree on. And so what we got to continue to do as Democrats is speak out when Republicans try to label us as people who are for open borders. Now, I'm not going to deny this. Did Biden and the Harris administration take a more relaxed approach to border security? They did. But since Trump has been in office and towards the end of the Biden administration, you've seen more Democrats say what I'm saying is let's secure the borders. Let's make sure that we treat everyone fairly. Let's enforce the law, but let's make sure that we're not arresting and detaining documented folks. And then if they're detained, they want to come back into this country. Let's come up with true immigration reform that figures out a pathway for them to re-enter this country legally. That is what the majority of Democrats that I'm associated with. And that's what I hear Democrats that are coming, they're saying in sort of battleground states when they're trying to get elected.
All right, Brian, I'll give you the last word on this and we'll move on.
Well, I agree with him. Barack Obama had a really good record on this. He did a great job of defending the borders and getting people sent back out. I do think that President Trump has taken it up a notch when it comes to sealing the border, something that for many years we kept hearing Democrats say just simply could not be done, and the wall was stupid and not a good approach to doing this. Trump has shown that a tough approach, a serious approach, can stop the flow of illegal immigration. And also what he has done, and this is an underlying part of this story, is the enforcement has sent a message to Latin America and other countries: don't come here illegally. Go through the process or don't do it, because there's going to be consequences forever in Republican and Democrat administrations. This is not just the Biden administration, even though he had the worst record that we've ever seen. For years, America has turned a blind eye. They have wanted the workforce. They wanted the cheap labor. They wanted all the upsides of illegal, unregulated immigration. But Americans have had enough. This was a betrayal of the American people to have allowed this to happen for as long as it did. And because of the accumulation of that disregard of the rule of law, we've had to have what some people see as a draconian approach to address it. We should never have been here in the first place. It should never have gotten as bad as it did. Does it create human tragedies? Yes. That's what always happens when you ignore the rule of law.
All right, gentlemen, thank you. Let's talk about Georgia politics. Jon Ossoff and Keisha Lance Bottoms took their joint campaigns to Savannah over the weekend. It was Ossoff's first campaign stage appearance since Mike Collins became the Republican nominee. Ossoff focused on the House Ethics Committee probe of Collins again, mentioning his former aide Brandon Phillips and the allegations of federal tax dollars illegally going to Phillips's girlfriend. He said, quote, "This kid was such a mess that he had to resign from the Trump campaign, but Mike Collins saw Brandon and thought he would make a great chief of staff," end quote. Keisha Lance Bottoms kept her campaign focused on health care, attacking Rick Jackson for winning $1 billion in state health care contracts while opposing Medicaid expansion and at one point calling him a gazillionaire. Tharon, what's your take on this unity message as it continues now post-runoff?
It's still working, and they're still unified, and they chose Savannah for a reason, because as Democrats know, we got to figure out a way to expand the base. What's in play now is trying to go after more moderates and independents, but also making sure that the base feel heard. But I want to echo something you said, Russ, and I'll go Jon Ossoff first and then Keisha Lance Bottoms. Jon Ossoff really sharpened his attacks on Mike Collins, but more importantly, sharpening his attacks on what many Republicans are saying is a scandal-ridden administration, not just from his former chief of staff and former campaign aide, but there's also been some claims from the Ossoff campaign about his current chief of staff. And these are all facts. I mean, it got so bad during the primary runoff that Mike Collins actually had to fire Brandon Phillips, who was a longtime advisor, chief of staff, aide to him in the campaign and also in the administration. And so when you hear people like Eric Erickson sort of, and I'm just going to paraphrase here, raising concerns that this may actually bring Mike Collins down, I'm hearing from Republicans even today that they feel that Collins is actually a heavy weight. He's a heavy lift to Rick Jackson's campaign. And then when you hear Cody Hall, who clearly, full disclosure, he worked for Derek Dooley, who, again, I'm paraphrasing, said that these scandals by Collins staffers are going to be a grave concern to him going into the general election. These are all things that came out. And so there's clearly got to be something in the polling that shows that Jon Ossoff believes that amplifying those scandals that are under investigation, some of them have been investigated, is a huge hit on the Collins campaign. As far as Keisha Lance Bottoms, look, she really zeroed in on her trying to make the distinction that, in the famous words of K-Dot, B-Rob, and Kendrick Lamar, Rick Jackson is not like us, by saying that, hey, there's nothing wrong with you getting rich and becoming a billionaire. And she did use the term gazillionaire. But let's talk about how he made his fortune. And she went on a very poignant attack to talk about these contracts that allegedly that Rick Jackson got in no bid contracts. So you'll hear more of that on the campaign. And she also tied it into healthcare. And I believe that healthcare, Russ, in this state and in this country is truly a bipartisan issue. Republicans and Democrats should be very concerned about the uninsured that live in this state. And then lastly, I'll say is this, what you're going to hear next from the Keisha Lance Bottoms campaign is I believe that the number of people who are rolled off the Affordable Care Act Rolodex, folks who did not re-enter with the subsidies that have been cut and things like that, she's going to continue to drive home how the state right now is suffering because of the ACA redetermination process not working, but also figuring out a way to make her more appealing to these working class Georgians. So I think the two of them together in Savannah with a unity message, it took a lot of money to put that production together, but I think that unified sort of appearance is something that's going to work with Democrats. But you got to continue to watch, will they continue to go towards the middle? You can fire up the base right now, but as we get towards Labor Day, there's got to be some policy issues that are going to be appealing to Democrats, Republicans, and independents.
All right. Brian, does Rick Jackson's childhood in foster care inoculate him from the gazillionaire tag or not?
Look, I don't think that there is a penalty imposed on a candidate by the voters for being successful in life. I think you have seen in the 2016 election, going back to that with President Trump, that many Americans were like, we want an outsider businessman who has shown he can succeed. He understands how business works. And we think that that kind of leadership and that knowledge is going to be beneficial to the administration of government. So, I think in this case, it's a net positive, because this is not somebody who was born with a silver spoon in his mouth and just inherited. This is somebody who built an empire by himself from the ground up and didn't do it in a linear, predictable path up the mountain. Like he's had business failures. He always says nobody's failed more than I have, but he kept at it, kept getting himself up and working toward building the Jackson healthcare that we see today, which brings us to that state contract that Keisha Lance Bottoms brought up and attacked. Let me tell you a little bit about that. And again, I am a consultant to the Jackson campaign. I always want to disclose that. But in 2020, when COVID hit, there was no medical procurement personnel company out there that could do for Georgia what Jackson Healthcare could do. We needed doctors, we needed nurses, and we needed them ASAP. Okay, the no bid contract, right? Well, do you know what a contract takes to procure in Georgia? About 9 months would be the bare minimum. In March of 2020, that wasn't possible. Governor Kemp had to save lives. We had one of the epicenters of COVID down in Albany. It hit during a church service down there and spread like wildfire. We had people who were put into P.B. Putney Hospital who went into a coma, not even knowing what illness had overtaken them. We didn't even know what COVID was yet necessarily. Rick Jackson and his company went into action, got those staffers, those experts, those medical personnel into the nursing homes, into the hospitals, and they saved lives. So he's very proud of what he did there. And he'll be the first to tell you that, whereas the Democrats are going to make this sound like some great giveaway to Jackson Healthcare, the board of Jackson Healthcare actually pushed back on Rick a little bit during this because they were being offered much higher rates for personnel in other states, such as New York, which was paying way more per head than Georgia was. Rick said, nope, I know we're not going to make as much money, but I'm a Georgian. I'm going to work and help my state and my fellow Georgians first. We're more than happy to have that conversation with Keisha Lance Bottoms. And it's interesting that she was sort of Tharon likes to use the phrase success shame. He says that a lot. And I think that she's trying to success shame Rick Jackson. But I want to remind Georgians, this is someone who has a second home on Martha's Vineyard. I mean, this is not somebody who is struggling to make a down payment for her ranch house on the south side of Atlanta. I mean, she is a well-off person in the eyes of the average Georgian who has a household income of $50,000 to $80,000.
Yes, Martha's Vineyard is Tony. I've been there. It's been a minute, but you're absolutely right. It's high real estate, no question about it. All right, gentlemen, we've got to move on. But thank you. And next on Red Clay Rundown, the latest on the legal battle involving the Fulton County Board of Elections. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Red Clay Rundown. The dispute over whether Fulton County must seat two Republican-backed nominees to its election board is headed to the Georgia Supreme Court now. Commissioners have refused to seat Julie Adams and Jason Frazier to the Fulton County Board of Registrations and Elections. Adams is an incumbent who voted against certifying the results of 2024's primary election. Frazier is a known denier of the 2020 election and has challenged thousands of voter registrations in Fulton County. Georgia's Court of Appeals ruled that the county does have the authority to refuse the nominees of the county's Republican Party, reversing a lower court decision. So the Supreme Court will hear this case when it returns in the fall. All right, Brian, I'll let you start this one. What's your response to this?
You know, I have mixed feelings about this, Russ, because one, the current system where local county parties are able to put someone on a board that has some sort of government authority, I'm a little iffy on that. And not all Republicans and maybe not all Democrats are going to agree with me on that. But the local county folks aren't elected. They have no authority from the people. They're not empowered by the people by any means. These are self-selected folks who just show up for breakfast on Saturday mornings once a month. And so I have a little problem with self-selected people making a impact on a board that does have some sort of authority over the rest of us. So I don't like the setup as it is. That said, as long as this is the setup, as long as those parties are empowered, and I do think that these election boards need to have bipartisan representation, but it does get a little bit tricky when you have a county, and this is true probably in most counties, where there's a huge partisan advantage to one side. And so essentially, if the county commission is able to deny membership from someone nominated by the county party, you're going to have a Democrat county commission keeping off Republicans whose viewpoints they don't like, or you're going to have a Republican county commission keeping off Democrats whose viewpoints they don't like. It becomes viewpoint discrimination. I think we have a bad system here. So it's hard for me to say what I want to see us do. It does look like I think the appeals court decision is what's going to be held up by the Supreme Court, and because it does say that the county commission has some say over who is appointed, that they have the final determination. That seems like a pretty reasonable interpretation of those words that are in the statute. So I think the Supreme Court will probably uphold that rule, and I think that the county commission will continue to have that veto power over these appointments. But I think we need to restructure this, in a better way, where we're not empowering these county parties who I don't think have the right to make these decisions in their own.
All right, Tharon, your friend made a pretty good case against allowing the county party to have that level of authority over who ends up on the election board. What do you say?
Well, the thing that I would add to what B-Rob is saying is that I think it's actually incumbent upon the county parties to make sure that they nominate people who can actually pass the Democratic control Fulton County Board with a proper vote. But let's make sure we're fair and honest with our viewers. This is a Republican Party in Fulton County who has proposed clear-cut election deniers. These are people who are on the record for questioning the election outcome, not only in Fulton County, but in Georgia. And so why would you nominate a woman or man in a county like Fulton County who is in the national news now repeatedly in the last 2 or 3 election cycles, at least since 2020, who are on the record spouting and saying things that President Trump said, when clearly state leaders, Republicans and Democrats, saying that there was no facts that showed that the 2020 election was fraudulent and there was clear voter discrimination and miscounts of votes there. And so they have consistently nominated people that the Democrats would not support. And now, most recently, to Brian's point, they've got to go back to the drawing board and nominate folks that can actually pass a Democratic-controlled county. But I stand by these county commissioners who are pushing back on these nominees because of some of what I just shared with you and some other things as well. But the truth of the matter is that it's a county of Fulton County, which is is the largest county in the state of Georgia. It is probably one or two. I can make a case that they're number one as far as voter turnout for Democrats. And with the recent FBI raid, with all of the concerns that we've had around election workers being intimidated, called out by Rudy Giuliani and Donald Trump, Shay Moss and Ruby Freeman, who were these Fulton County election workers, I applaud the county making sure that they put appropriate, qualified, merit-based people on these election boards. And I think if our good friend Kathy Willett was here, who Brian just raved about and almost came into tears when she left Georgia Gang, she would tell you that having served on this board, that the amount of interference and pushback that Republicans did, and some of these people who actually associate with the folks that are being recognized, there's no way that the county wants to go backwards. They're trying to do their best to make sure that the integrity and the functionality of the election board stays intact. So, look, I think that we just got to wait and see what the court decision is going to be. We are going to have some turnover in Fulton County on the commission, but ultimately, I think the Republicans just need to nominate and propose better people to a democratically controlled board of commissioners in Fulton County.
All right. Well, again, the state Supreme Court takes this up in the fall. Coming up next on Red Clay Rundown, how the delayed Road to Housing Act will impact Georgians if it ever gets passed. Thanks for staying with us for Red Clay Rundown. The Road to Housing Act sailed through Congress last week with bipartisan support, but it isn't law yet, as President Trump has refused to sign it until the SAVE Act is passed, which it will not be unless the Republicans in the U.S. Senate get rid of the filibuster. So we'll see what happens on that score. In the meantime, the housing bill would be important here in Georgia, as a recent study by the Atlanta Regional Commission found the metro area needs more than 350,000 new homes in the next decade to support estimated population growth. Some critics say the bill doesn't get to the most essential problem, which is the lack of affordability. But of course, affordability and, supply go hand in hand. Tharon, what's your response to all of this?
This was the one time where I feel like President Trump could have actually did something that truly benefits the American people. When you have a bipartisan bill actually make it to his desk, a bill that says, hey, we're going to put strong restrictions and pretty much eliminate the ability for these corporations to go into these neighborhoods and buy up these single family homes and take them away from people who save up, who people actually dream of the day of actually being homeowners. This was something that actually could have, honestly, the president could have campaigned on. I mean, we've heard Brian Robinson and other Republicans talk about affordability. We've heard them talk about how we need to make sure that these communities are not seeing their houses being bought up by these private equity companies. And it put in true guidelines and procedures to make sure that people who have the means and ability to buy their first home or to keep their home or maybe even to upsize at home, that this market will be available to them. And Russ, I'm so glad that you actually mentioned that, because I have a lot of friends right now who are in real estate. And let's just bring it here to the Atlanta metro area. And shout out to the Atlanta Regional Commission for always doing great work and bringing us the data and the statistics to show where we're heading as a region. But we have so many people here right now who actually want to buy a home, but there is the ability for people who have a lot of money to, when houses come on the market, they have so much cash built up, they actually go into these cash offers, and folks who are depending on having a down payment or down payment assistance or to try to have a good interest rate where they can actually buy a home, they don't even get a chance to even bid or compete. I can't tell you how many of my friends are actually like, look, I don't even bid anymore. I don't even call my realtor back if it's a certain criteria in a certain zip code. And so President Trump refusing to sign this bill, and because he's waiting on the SAVE Act, which you said rightly, Russ, that it doesn't have the support without the filibuster being eliminated, this shows you that this whole thing that Republicans across the country are talking about as far as affordability, I believe the president when he said it. He said he believes affordability is a hoax. He said that he likes inflation, and the people who are going to suffer are many of these homeowners who really want to not be renters anymore, who really want to make sure that they have the ability to have access to affordable housing. And we have a president who refuses to support it. So kudos to those bipartisan members of Congress who came together to vote on it. But now the president is playing hardball because he wants his SAVE Act passed, which I think has a very, very tough road ahead to even get a vote, because they're not going to call unless they absolutely know they have the votes.
Well, Brian, does the president take a political risk in not supporting this bill, not signing it?
I think he's trying to use it for leverage to get other things. I don't know that it's really a matter of opposition to the bill or what is in it. At least I hope so, because, as you and Tharon know, I feel very passionately about this issue. And it's also heartening to see bipartisan action, as Tharon was saying, on any piece of legislation. But I think we are seeing broad support here because this is such a pressing issue, and our region will be one of the ones where the crunch is felt the most. I'll remind you that when the Biden inflation started in 2021, 2022, that Atlanta, for a moment in time, had the highest inflation in the entire nation. So there was already an affordability issue here. And since COVID, we simply have not kept up with the demand for housing with new construction. And that has been layered on top by local zoning that makes it very difficult to build affordable housing that can be bought. I'm not talking about rentals. I do think that communities have a serious and legitimate concern about mass construction of apartments where you bring in low-income families and put them into certain school districts and really create an education zone issue. I think that's completely legit. If you're a homeowner in those areas, you have a right to protect your property values. But we need to incentivize home ownership. We've tried this in the past and with some bad consequences. We tried to have this ownership society during the Bush and Clinton administrations, and that is what led to these wild mortgages, people with the zero down payments and the balloon mortgages, all of these things that led to the 2008 crisis. I think that we learned our lesson there, but we once again need to help people who can afford it and who want to settle down in a place or raise a family to be able to buy a home, not only to have a roof over their head. That's important. That's rule number one. But in the bigger picture, the American dream depends on getting your foot on the economic wealth ladder. And you do that when you buy your first home in a neighborhood where it's going to appreciate. We used to be able to buy our homes in our 20s in America, Russ, when you and your wife were first married, but you could go buy a home. Today in Georgia, the first-time home buyer average age is 41 years old. That is an American tragedy, and that is going to destroy the American dream. It is going to make people lose hope in the American dream long before it even happens. We've got to do something about it. We've got to change local zoning. We've got to incentivize more affordable house construction so that 25-year-olds, the 30-year-olds, have a chance to buy a house. If they don't, we are not going to have families and leaders who feel invested in their communities. Renters don't feel that connection. They are not looking to the good of the community 30 years down the road the way a homeowner does, because the homeowner has an economic stake in the success of the community. Our nation depends on that. And so you're going to hear something very rare from me right here, Russ and Tharon, very rare indeed. Raphael Warnock has been a leader on this issue, and I commend him. And the Republican nominee for Lieutenant Governor here, Greg Dolezal, has prioritized this issue as well. I commend him here on the more local and state level. We've got to do something because we've got a crisis looming. We know how to fix it. We need more supply, and we need to make sure that people who are now Gen Z can buy a home.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, the median house price, as I understand it right now, is something in the neighborhood of $400,000. And as you guys have seen, even monthly rents are eye-popping for young people. I don't know how folks make it, honestly, on if they have a less than robust income. What's your last word on this, Tharon?
Look, Russ, you hit the nail on the head there. I can't tell you how many of my friends, colleagues, folks who are actually what I like to call, honestly, working class, on the verge of being poor people in Atlanta. Folks right now are spending over 70%, maybe 65 to 70% of their income on their rent. And they had to take the last car that used a used car. Some of them are actually taking public transit, riding MARTA, because they can't find an affordable place to live in Atlanta. So then what's your option is to move out of the metro area, but then you're stuck in traffic. You're paying more for gas, and if you have the ability to have an electric car, you're having to use more electricity to actually use for the EV car. So this is a very big problem. We only focus sometimes on the poor people there, but there's a working class, there's a working poor in Atlanta right now who are literally living check to check. And these are college educated people. These are not folks who don't have college degrees and master's degrees, don't have some type of training in a job profession, but because there's nowhere to live, then a lot of them are actually moving back in homes with their parents, and the parents are making them pay rent. And some of these parents are actually making them pay a lot more money because they don't want them back. They're actually trying to get them to move back into the places. So this is a really big demographic that I talk to on a daily basis of folks who have said, look, I have to downsize, live in a 1-bedroom when I really need a 3-bedroom because the rent and the cost of living in Atlanta is just so high right now.
Yeah, well, to your point about people moving,
and let me say here too, well, another part of this legislation that I really support is beginning to crack down on hedge funds and Wall Street buying up all these homes. You have people, Georgians, putting in bids on homes and being outbid by Wall Street firms who then take what could have been a new homeowner and they make it a rental property. That is taking us backwards. And look, there is some place in the market for these firms to build homes and provide housing that is needed. Not everybody needs to own a home, but for those who want to, there needs to be opportunity. And these Wall Street firms are standing in the way and outbidding them and pushing them aside. And that's got to be stopped. And I think that there's a bipartisan appetite to do it.
I was just going to say exactly right. I mean, that's what the passage of this in the House and Senate shows, is that there is bipartisan support. And to your point, Tharon, about people moving outside of town, the fastest growing county last year in the state of Georgia, Dawson County, all the way up where the outlet malls are, that used to be in the middle of nowhere. Now it's suburban Atlanta, which is really kind of hard to believe. But that's where we are. All right. Coming up next on Red Clay Rundown, Brian will tell us about his trip to Israel. Very exciting. It is good to have our friend Brian back. He was in Israel last week at the invitation of the American Israel Education Foundation. Brian, you were kind enough to send us some pictures and video. Just give us a sense of what you learned while you were there.
It was an amazing experience, Russ, and thank you so much for letting me speak to it. And thank you and Tharon for showing the video that I did at the Nova Festival, where Hamas came into this music festival and slaughtered about 360 people out of the 3,000 who were there in a horrifying scene. We were able at the Nova Festival site to hear from a young survivor who's now 25 years old who lost 4 friends on that day. And it was a truly moving experience. We were able to go from there to an overlook where you could see into Gaza from the Israeli border. And we were in a town that had been under attack on October the 7th, where families were slaughtered in their homes and in the streets. And when you are able to go to a high spot there in that town and look into Gaza, you could see just how close to peril, how close to the knife's edge so many in the Israeli population live. And in fact, everybody in that tiny little country, which could fit easily down, in a section. If you just went down I-75, Israel would fit easily inside of Georgia and would come nowhere close to getting to the east-west borders, to give you a sense of how small this place is. So looking into Gaza and seeing how Hamas was able to just tear down a fence, come in, bring thousands of people in, and slaughter civilians did give you a real sense of the danger they face. We also went to the border with Lebanon on the other end of the northern end of the country, and there are mountains surrounding it. Of course, we've all heard of the Golan Heights, which is on the Syrian side, but those mountains give Hezbollah a lot of opportunity to lob bombs into Israel, into some of the kibbutzes, which are communes there in the northern part of Israel, kind of near the Sea of Galilee. And again, just you can see why Israel has had to take extreme measures to sort of clear out any of the people who are near that border, because it's just too much of a danger. It's too easy to take advantage of those geographically high spots and to lob bombs into the country of Israel. So I will say that this group's purpose is to educate Americans, people who are influencers, people who are policymakers, to bring them over so they can see for themselves the security challenges. There are parts of the country where between the Mediterranean and where the West Bank begins is only about 9 or 10 miles. And so, if you're on a high spot in the West Bank with a missile launcher, you could knock out a plane coming into Ben Gurion Airport, the only airport in the entire country with commercial traffic. So every part of the country is really insecure. And I know there's a lot of criticism and analysis of the tactics undertaken by Israel, but I will say that I saw people who would love to have peace, people who would like to just be left alone, a lot of soldiers who spoke of the horrors of war and the nightmares that go along with being in this urban combat like they had in Gaza over the last few years. These aren't people who want to be in an eternal state of war. But one thing made very clear to us is that for many of the Palestinians, the only option that will ever meet muster will be to eradicate the Jewish people from this land. So I did get a very powerful lesson on the geopolitics and the security issues there in Israel. But one thing very special to me, Russ, and I'm sure would be to you as well, as we're both Christians, is being able to go to the Sea of Galilee and go through the ruins of a synagogue where Jesus would have been, to go to the spot where St. Peter lived there along the shores of Galilee, where Jesus told them to move the nets from one side of the boat to the other, and they filled the nets with fish, to the Mount of Beatitudes, where Jesus delivered the Sermon on the Mount, and to a recently excavated pilgrimage road from the city of David up to the old city in Jerusalem where the temple was during Jesus's time. And these are steps leading up to the old city that Jesus himself would have walked on. And as a person of the Christian faith, it really is a meaningful, moving time to see the things that our Lord and Savior would have seen in person, to walk along the path where his feet would have trod. Those are just experiences that are just extraordinarily meaningful and have this spiritual impact on you. So thank you so much for giving me a chance to talk about what was just really one of the greatest weeks of my life.
Well, I'm so glad you had the experience and appreciate you sharing it with us. I do have just one quick question. Obviously, there's been some tension in recent weeks between President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu. I wonder if you sensed among the people who were taking you around Israel, among the Israelis there, a concern that perhaps the friendship with the United States might not be what it was.
There is a lot of concern, Russ, and I'm glad you brought this up. First, let me say one of the things that struck me was that we would occasionally see Trump 2024 signs around different parts of Israel. I think that amongst parts of the population, there's great appreciation for the long-term support of Israel that they've received from President Trump, and of course, the partnership with America as they've taken on Iran. But we met with parliamentarians in the Knesset, which is the Israeli parliament, on Monday of last week. And there was one who had been to Mar-a-Lago a few times. I mean, somebody who was a huge fan of President Trump, knew him personally. And he too was, very reticent about where the president is on the current issues. They do feel like there's been a change in the American posture. And they are highly concerned about the potential peace deal with Iran as lacking the teeth that they would want to see. For them, the main issue being so close to Iran, they are what they say is a one-bomb country. The country is so small that just one big bomb from Iran could really wipe out the entire country. So this is life or death for them. And making sure that Iran has no ability or pathway to a nuclear weapon is huge. So yes, right now I sense a tremendous amount of concern about American policy vis-a-vis Iran amongst the Israelis, even those who have been big fans of President Trump.
All right, gentlemen, thank you very much. Let's move on tonight. Finally, the Congressional Labor Caucus sent a letter to the CEO of Delta Airlines over the weekend. They said that the company should stay neutral as some of its employees try to start a union. The letter signed by 170 members of Congress, but none of them were from Georgia. Atlanta-based Delta is the only major U.S. airline whose flight attendants are not unionized. So, gentlemen, I know that you have some expertise when it comes to this and some thoughts there, and let's get your take.
Well, first and foremost, I mean, this letter is taken very seriously by Delta. You saw Ed Bastian come out right away and folks on the Delta team say, look, we welcome this conversation. But one of the things that I've heard from folks at Delta, and you've heard some of my Democratic friends who are very pro-union, they're saying you don't have to be pro-union to be pro-worker. And the question here is that Delta has got to continue to figure out a way to be transparent, allow these workers to have these conversations, but meanwhile, continue to promote the level of success that they've had with some of the national rankings and some of the things that they've been recognized for, particularly being a really great place to work. So in a city like Atlanta and the leadership of Delta, they're very proud of the work that they're doing and how they treat their workers, and the environment is one of the best places to work. However, they want to make sure that they're fair and open to their workers who are exploring the possibility of a union. But I think that as long as Delta continues to stay pro-worker, stay transparent, being focused on devoting key resources, I think I read 1% of all of their profits go towards operational and enhancing the work environment for their workers. I think they got to keep that same posture, but let this process continue to go on.
All right, Brian, what do you think about this business of making sure that the management there, that CEO Ed Bastian and the rest of the folks in charge there at Delta don't interfere with what is happening in terms of potentially making the flight attendants unionized?
Well, I'd like to start out with the fact that I want to, again, for the second time in this show, commend some Democrats. The Georgia Democrats, who I disagree with on most issues, did not sign on to this letter, and I commend them for that. You know why they didn't? It's because they know They know how good of a company Delta is and how well it treats their employees because those employees are their constituents. Delta is the largest private employer in the state. That is huge. And they have a profit sharing program that put out $1.3 billion in 2025. So when you have 3,000 workers in Georgia, when those checks go out, when that money hits the bank in the direct deposit, that is an immediate economic impact ripple that goes throughout the entire economy of Georgia. So we are huge beneficiaries of how well Delta treats its employees. So good on those Democrats for not signing on to that silly letter. Look, unions play a role in our economy, and they're important when workers are being given a bad deal by employers or being mistreated, being abused, or not treated fairly. Delta doesn't do that. And these employees have had the chance to unionize through the years, have chosen not to. And the one thing Delta said that I think is absolutely right is we have a right to educate our employees on the facts. We will engage in these negotiations. Employees can decide to unionize if they want, but we're going to give them the facts from our perspective. And that's why the Delta employees haven't unionized. It's not because they haven't been given a chance. It's because they have a good deal.
All right, gentlemen. Always great to have a conversation with you. Glad you're back, Brian, from Israel. Glad to have you back on Red Clay Rundown, and always Tharon. And gosh, I don't know if you watched Germany today, but Paraguay beat Germany, which is nuts. Now we're in the knockout round. And for Wednesday, when the game is going to be played here at Mercedes-Benz Stadium, the Fan Fest is already sold out. No VIP tickets, no nothing left. That's how popular this has become, not only here, but around the country. Well, gentlemen, we got 10 seconds left, so that's all there is for Red Clay Rundown. We appreciate you being with us, and I hope you'll join us again tomorrow night.